But now you've decided to go more specifically into taking their films and actually getting them distributed yourselves through Cine Circle. Could you sort of touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying I think the big conclusion that I ended up with is all roads lead to distribution, which is why the topic that we'll discuss today is so important. Because at the end of the day, if you know how to sell a film profitably, then you've got it figured out. I will say some things that are a little bit controversial in response to that.
Hi, ZB.
Hi, Steve. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for jumping on this. I appreciate it. What I want to do ultimately, to make the focal point of this, is to get it over to film distribution and the initiatives that you and Cine Circle are starting to do with regards to helping indie filmmakers get their films distributed. But before we get to that, it would be great if we could just maybe touch on a little bit about yourself, your filmmaking background, and some of the steps that led to you creating Cine Circle and how Cine Circle, what Cine Circle does and how Cine Circle helps indie filmmakers.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is ZB Siwek. I got into the industry about 10 years ago. After finishing university, I thought that I really wanted to produce films. So I moved to London, started working on some short films. About 2 or 3 years later, I realized that I knew exactly how to make a film, but I had absolutely no idea how to make any money out of it. As a crew member, I had no idea how to find jobs. As a producer, I had no idea how to find funding. And I also had no idea how to sell the films in terms of distribution. And with that, I got a little bit discouraged, and I actually moved to a completely different career path in marketing, outside of the film industry, where I worked my way up to become the head of marketing of a company called Storytellers. But on the side, I always had this passion for film. And I actually took that struggle that I had within the film industry, and out of that, I realized that there was this huge necessity for more events, more courses, and more opportunities to learn about the business side of film industry. And that's where I started the company Cine Circle, which is a company that's really 100% focused on teaching filmmakers that business side. We don't teach filmmakers or actors how to act, how to shoot films. We really focused on helping them fund their films, distribute their films, and also find sustainable career paths in the film industry. And that's something that I've been now doing for 8 years or so. So it's been quite a long journey. And we do this through a variety of different things, including a film fund, a variety of events, including film and TV job fairs, film funding summits, and a variety of distribution opportunities as well.
I personally came across Cine Circle maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I was totally impressed by what I was seeing, and I attended a few of the events. One of them, funny enough, was about distribution, which we're going to touch on today. How would you say it's been with yourself trying to navigate these two things parallel, with trying to sustain yourself trying to maintain yourself as a filmmaker, as creating films yourself as a passion and as a craft, while at the same time building Cine Circle? How have you found those two things working side by side? Is it worked out easier or harder to navigate both things?
Well, one thing where I think I was quite lucky, and I don't mean to be cynical of this, but I hope that some filmmakers can take this positively and not negatively, is I figured out quite early on that I do not want to make films myself. And that was a very, very big positive in my career, because I'm still very much involved within the film industry. I'm helping a lot of filmmakers finance films, distribute films. I'm helping them develop their careers in the film industry, but I haven't and I've been an executive producer on quite a few different projects, both short films and feature films, but I haven't produced my own film in quite a while. And I actually think that there are going to be a lot of people who might be listening to this, who sort of feel like they've had this dream of being in the film industry since they were, 6 years old. And because of that, they're still trying to do that. But actually, perhaps there are many other, areas that they could actually be, a much better fit for and enjoy a lot more and have a much more steady career in, that are perhaps in the film industry or the film adjacent industry, but not particularly in the role that they've always thought that they would do. So with that, I always had an open mind, and that's really helped me progress in my career, rather than get stuck on this, well, since I was 6 years old, I wanted to produce films, therefore I must produce films. Once I let go of that, it helped me to come back into the industry in a much more sustainable way.
Would you say you've totally sort of put to one side your own filmmaking aspirations as a director or as a filmmaker? Sort of, you don't see yourself coming back around to those, or is that something you would like to come back around to at some point?
I was always very interested in the business side of the industry and how it works from that aspect. I was always very entrepreneurial. Very early on, I realized that directing was not for me, because I did not have that creative fuel that you need to have as a director. I also found that being the main producer on a feature film and having to work with very creative directors was something that was challenging for me, because I'm one of those people where if something doesn't make sense on a spreadsheet, it doesn't make sense to me. And then when you're producing a film, anyone who's produced a film and who has ever worked with a director and been a director know that when you're producing a film, it's not always going to make sense on a spreadsheet. How you budget, what you put the money into, how you shoot the film, it's not always going to make the analytical sense, but that's where the creativity comes in. What I found is that for me, I am much more interested in being on that business side, which happens with the development, with the funding, with figuring out how to develop a film that's actually marketable, and then once the film is finished, with distribution.
Your brain is, to a degree, wired as a filmmaker. You do understand the passion side of it. You do understand the drive to wanting to be a filmmaker and getting your creative vision on screen. But on the other hand, by the sounds of things, you've also got that very kind of strategic, business-minded brain. As you say, you like to see things down in spreadsheets and things. When that isn't many filmmakers' strengths. So in a way, it could sound like you could be the perfect partner for filmmakers and indie filmmakers to partner up with, because a lot of indie filmmakers do lack those other strengths, don't they? With, as you say, with the spreadsheets and the numbers and the organization and all the other kind of aspects outside of creating that vision.
Absolutely. And I think there are very few people in the film industry who are very business oriented. And the reason for that is that film is notorious for being a really, really bad business, right? We know that, 99% of films never turn a profit. So when you have someone who's got a, very business oriented mind, they take one look at the film industry and go, this is not for me. I managed to see past that because I had that drive of being within the film industry, because it's always something that I wanted to do. And that's when I realized that statistic of 99% of films don't make a profit doesn't tell the whole story. But I had to, go on quite a long journey to figure that out and realize that actually from that 99% that don't make a profit, 50% of those films are just terrible quality and we're never going to make a profit. And the other 50% are films where there wasn't a good enough marketing and distribution plan, or it wasn't executed well enough. And suddenly, when you take those factors and you make a good film that's marketable and there is a distribution plan, suddenly you've got about a 50% chance of success. But there aren't enough business-oriented people within the film industry to drive those types of projects into the market.
I mean, you must get asked all the time by indie filmmakers, what's your advice on this? What's your advice on that?
And I think the big conclusion that I ended up with is all roads lead to distribution. which is why the topic that we'll discuss today is so important. Because at the end of the day, if you know how to sell a film profitably, then you've got it figured out. If you know how to do that, you will very easily be able to fund films. If you can make a profitable film, there's no easier way to get investment for a film than to have a past film that's made money and that's had a successful distribution. So we'll be able to fund more films, therefore we'll be able to employ more people, and therefore, we'll have a more sustainable industry. This is why, post-COVID, post-writer strikes, the US film industry has started to bounce back. There are a lot more films being made, and that's because I teach a lot of filmmakers in the US and in the UK. And I can tell you one thing is that in the US, every single one of those filmmakers considers themselves an entrepreneur. They're there to make a film and to make a profit, and then they understand that business side. Whereas in the UK, the industry has not bounced back anywhere near to the scale that the US has. And that's because most of the filmmakers that I teach here, they consider themselves creatives rather than entrepreneurs. So that big realization that I had is if you can learn how to sell and distribute a film, then you've got everything else figured out. If you don't learn that, you will never be able to truly be successful. And that's the same as it is in any business. If you run any business and you can't sell a product or a service, you'll never be able to grow that business. If you can figure that out, sales cures all else that happens within that company.
Great points there. Absolutely. Absolutely. The one thing that jumps out to me to ask you is, from a filmmaker's perspective, and this might sound like a silly question, depending on who you're asking and who's listening, but from a filmmaker's perspective, what qualifies a film as being successful? Because on one hand, you've got the financial aspect, where it's, well, obviously, a successful film is if the film goes on, it makes some money, and you're able to then use that money to fund the next film, which is completely valid way of looking at it. Or is it looking at it from the artistic point of view, with what you've got on the end screen with regards to the finished product of the film itself and the actual art and the craft, and not necessarily the financial aspect? Which school of thought? I mean, it would be nice to tick both those boxes. Of course it was. But which school of thought deems one successful more than the other? Because if you're going down a road where you feel like you have to qualify your film as a success from a financial point of view, suddenly you do have to start taking other factors into play with more craft in it to make sure it's a financial point of view, which could possibly steer you away from the artistic side of things. So which school of thought qualifies as being a success?
Yeah. I will say some things that are a little bit controversial in response to that. But before I start on that, it depends on you as the filmmaker who are making the film and what success means to you. It just knowing that if you're not thinking about the financial aspect, you're making this film as a hobby. It's a hobby. You're making a film and you want that film to be shown to the world. It's a passion. It's great. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not a career and it's not a business because it's not making money. Therefore, it is a hobby. And I reckon there is about 80% filmmakers out there who would actually be way happier having a full-time job and having film as a hobby on the side. Because the second you start thinking about the financial aspects, you start to do jobs that you don't necessarily want to do. You start to do the commercials and the sort of soul-sucking work that you just really don't like to do just because it's somewhat within the film industry. So that's the first thing. Do you want it to be a hobby or do you really want it to be a business? If you want it to be a business, if you want it to be a real career, you have to first and foremost think about the financials. Now, this idea that your films, there are many different ways to look at the success of a feature film that had investment, right? I'm not talking about a no budget feature film. I'm talking about a feature film where you've either invested some of your money, you've gotten private investors on board, and you're looking to make a return on that investment. You will hear throughout the film festival circuit And as you start on your distribution journey, you will hear that success looks like there are many different shapes and forms in which success comes. So are you looking to make money, or are you looking to build up your career as a filmmaker? Are you looking to make a film that's going to have an impact on the world? Are you looking to... You will hear this, and you will hear this story from distributors who are more interested in making money for themselves than for you. It's a story that distributors tell you to sell you their services and give you not much money back in return. Those stories are there to make you feel better about the fact that distributors made money from your film and you didn't. So I would just be very, very wary of that the second you get private investment into your film, the second you got a film fund involved in your film, or the second you put sizable amount of money into a film from any other source, your number one priority is making that money back. And it has to be, because that's the point where you've decided it's a business. If you're making a no budget film and it's a hobby, or you're investing just a little bit of your own money and you don't not really expecting to make it back, that's great. But if you've got investment, it must be a business.
There is a difference. I mean, that might sound obvious to some people, but I do think there's also a large percentage of indie filmmakers who don't necessarily take those things on board earlier on. And, you know, suddenly they're hit with those a bit later on down the line, and it can come as a bit of a, what do I do now kind of a situation.
Yeah. And, you know, and to add to that, if you've ever met someone who loves to cook, right? If you know a friend who's just like so passionate about cooking, they spend all weekends cooking, my advice to those people is, my God, do not become a chef, because it will suck the joy out of this passion that you have, right? And this is why it's really not a criticism to say filmmaking is a hobby and a passion for me, but I've got another job that earns the money. Because then you can make sure that every single film project that you work on is the one that you really want to work on, and it's the one that you're really truly passionate about. What I really hate seeing is when the joy gets sucked out of filmmakers because they're trying to do filmmaking as a full-time job, because that's what happened to me. And that's why I stepped out of that, because I felt like, why am I killing myself in this industry that doesn't pay particularly well? Or sometimes I'm finding that I have to pay to work and I'm not enjoying it. So sometimes it's a good way to just step back and go, maybe this is better as a hobby, or maybe I really need to rethink exactly how I'm going to turn this into a viable business or career.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's such a broad area. We could spend all day trying to sort of pinpoint certain aspects, because it is such a broad area, and that conversation, while super interesting, could go on forever. And I don't think we've probably got the amount of time to cover all aspects, but it is such, there are so many different angles to it to sort of look at. So more recently, I have noticed, I came across on Cine Circle that you have started to make roads into helping indie filmmakers specifically with distribution of their films, which is brilliant, because I know, being an independent filmmaker, indie filmmaker, when I set off down the road of making my film, I didn't start thinking of distribution until it was too late, until it was far too late. I'd probably not until I started finishing the film, my feature film, then I started to think about distribution and where this film is going to go and where it's going to live and how people are going to see it. By then it was just ridiculously too late. I should have been thinking about those things before, I switched the camera on. Maybe there should have been some kind of plan in place. Of course, you have an ideal plan, but then you also have to have some more kind of realistic plans that are within your own power, so to speak. But so I've noticed that Cine Circle have now branched into wanting to help indie filmmakers with distribution, which is brilliant. So let's now sort of touch on that a little bit more. I mean, obviously that has been something that Cine Circle has helped indie filmmakers with for a while, with regards to offering events and stuff where you touch on that side of things to broaden indie filmmakers, knowledge on that area. But now you've decided to go more specifically into taking their films and actually getting them distributed yourselves through Cine Circle onto a platform for audiences to watch. So you've now taken it to that next step. So could you sort of touch on that a little bit more? What was the deciding factor of like, right, now we're going to go to the next level. Now we, Cine Circle, are going to actively help these filmmakers get their films out there onto platforms?
Yeah, and I'll start off by saying I think most filmmakers can distribute their own films, and most filmmakers should distribute their own films. There is no need for a distributor to take 50 to even 100% of the sales of the film, because trust me, most distributors are doing something that you can very easily do yourself. Where we've decided to help filmmakers is with short film distribution, because as most people know, short films don't really make any money. They normally don't get distribution deals, and the reason for that is simple. They're too short for someone to buy them online. They're too short to monetize through AVOD platforms, through ads online as well. Therefore, it's very, very difficult to monetize short films. So really what we're doing is we are packaging short films into feature film anthologies and helping filmmakers make money off of their short films by distributing that feature film product. And this is something that is brand new that we've just started this year. So we're currently in the process of distributing our first couple of anthologies. We're excited to see what the results are, but we also know that no matter what the results are, the alternative was that those filmmakers will not make any money whatsoever. And I can't stress enough that that's not the case with feature film distribution. Where a distributor might take your film, there is an alternative for you to distribute that film yourself. So there's two very different things when it comes to short film distribution and feature film distribution.
And as I say, I think it's a brilliant idea what you're doing by packaging people's short films into an anthology to then stretch that out into a feature film. Suddenly you've opened up the door to a lot more short filmmakers to be able to get their films onto, platforms or feel a bit more confident with regards to distribution. So you said you've already gone down this road already with a couple of projects. Are you able to touch on a little bit more where they're at?
Yeah, so we haven't gone, none of the films have been officially released yet. So currently we are in the process of doing that with a couple of films. There is a couple of reasons why this process takes a relatively long time. The first one, and this will be helpful for anyone who's looking to distribute their films, by the way, whether that be feature films or short films. Specifically regarding short film anthologies, what we do, which is a little bit different to any other companies that package short films into anthologies, is we allow all the filmmakers who will be part of an anthology to first watch each other's films and say that they're okay being coupled with those films. Because the biggest piece of negative feedback that we've gotten from other, or we've heard from other anthologies is that short filmmakers said, oh my God, my film was put with this really, really bad film, that whole feature film anthology got a really bad review saying these films are horrible, and they used the screenshot from my film in the article, right? So what we wanted to make sure is that all filmmakers can watch each other's films and say, yes, I'm okay with an anthology where I'm featured as a selection of these films. That took a little bit of time. Then, there are certain elements that you need for distribution, such as music cue sheets, certain documents like that, which not all short filmmakers have, right? So that takes a little while to put together. Once you have that film, you then need to go to various different platforms. So you might want to have your film on Tubi, on Amazon, on Apple TV, and so on. That process takes time because you have to go through an aggregator. An aggregator is a middleman between you and all those streaming platforms, because the streaming platforms never deal with individual filmmakers. If you're a filmmaker, you can't yourself put your film on Tubi. You have to go through an aggregator. And that aggregator takes thousands, tens of thousands of films and submits them to Tubi. That aggregator does the quality control. The aggregator also deals with all of the payments. So an example of an aggregator essentially is FilmHub, for example. FilmHub is a distribution platform where you put your film onto the platform. FilmHub then pitches it to various different streaming platforms, and you can then get on platforms such as Tubi through that.
We will get right back to the main video in just 1 second, but before we do, another thing I want to help you with is this. So, like most ambitious filmmakers, I had all the same worries before starting my first feature-length film in 2015. One of those was a concern that I couldn't make a film without a professional grade cinema camera and lots of other expensive filmmaking equipment. Now, it took some time to let go of those concerns and allow myself to start the project. And ultimately, by using the equipment I had available to me at the time, which certainly did not include a high-end cinema camera, I managed to produce a feature film that made its way to UK television screens, various online streaming platforms, and also had a large cinema screening. Now, I mention this not to try and boast, but to ease any fears you might have about not having the most advanced or ideal filmmaking equipment to your disposal. In the link below this video, you can download the short, bite-sized, 4-page free PDF I provided that dives deeper into equipment considerations. My goal is to share my thought process and decision-making around this area and give you more confidence and control over completing your own film project. So make sure you don't leave without getting it. Now let's get back to the main video.
But now, I suppose what you're doing is you're positioning yourself as a distribution company, so to speak. Really, that's what Cine Circle are doing. You're now saying, right, now we are going to be a distribution company. We might go through other channels and, as you say, middle parties and aggregators in order to get the films onto certain platforms. So you are now actively acting more or less as a distribution company for filmmakers. So I'm going to kind of fire a few things at you, if you don't mind, like thinking along those terms as if I'm speaking to a distributor now. So one thing I know from having gone down this road myself with my own films is it's all very well and good getting your films onto this platform, that platform, which is great. But as you know, there's a lot more that has to happen after that, because you could get your film on 3 or 4 pretty well-known platforms, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to watch it. So on one hand, you've got the distribution aspect that people need to think of early on. But the other aspect that I think people need to think of early on, and I think this is very interesting because this touches on heavily on your background, and I always say this to other indie filmmakers as well as the distribution side of things, is to massively think of the marketing side of things. How are you going to let people know about this film? Because at the end of the day, you'll be supplied a link to your film on whatever platform it goes on. It's still then up to you to get people to watch that film, which could then tie in with minute streams and revenue and things like that. You know, it's all kind of linked in together and stuff. So what does Cine Circle do on that front? Or do you work in collaboration with the actual filmmaker early on with regards to, right, listen, we also need to concentrate on the audience and the marketing side of things?
Yeah, as you said, marketing is crucial. And I think most of the time when I hear these types of podcast interviews that talk about film marketing, the advice that you get is incredibly generic. So I'm going to try to go specific over here to really kind of have people listening be able to visualize exactly what this looks like. First of all, you have to create a film that's actually marketable. Now, what does that mean? Long before you're distributing your film, long before you even shot your film, when you're coming up with the idea for your film, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. First of all, is there a gap in the market that you're trying to fill with this film? So most people have heard that dramas are not marketable. And the reason why dramas are harder to market than, for example, horror films is because there are so many dramas, so many indie dramas that are very, very similar, and there isn't a huge demand for them because there are not many people who on a Friday night will say, I want to watch an indie drama, right? So you are creating a film in an oversaturated market where there's already 100,000 different options and they're already not really being watched, right? And for example, this is one of the reasons I very recently spoke to a filmmaker who went on FilmHub. They put their film on FilmHub. Their film was pretty good, and it got accepted onto Tubi, onto Apple TV, onto Amazon, and onto 3 or 4 other platforms. And after a year, it earned $70 in revenue. So, not a huge amount of money there. And it's probably because that film wasn't particularly marketable. So what does a marketable film look like in terms of a film that can fill a gap in the market? For example, last year, and this is very much still true, this year, is that films, whether they be dramas even, with a predominantly Black female cast, are doing incredibly well. Incredibly well. Even if the film is of relatively poor quality, technically speaking, those films are doing incredibly well on platforms such as Tubi. Why? Because there is a real need for those films. There is a huge audience of people who want to watch films that are with a predominantly Black cast, but there are not many of those films, right? This is why, even huge blockbusters such as, like Black Panther were such successes, because you suddenly have a film that speaks to an audience in an underserved market, an audience of people who have been craving this type of film, and there aren't enough of them. So if you right now make a feature film with a predominantly Black female cast and you release it in the next couple of months, I can guarantee you that it's going to do pretty well on platforms such as Tubi. Because even platforms like Tubi are going to push your film because of the fact that it falls into this genre and because they know that it's a marketable film. So that's one example. Then there is the question that you gotta ask yourself, which is should my film be released right now? When should my film be released? Because timing is extremely important, right? And we can see this with the ways that huge platforms are currently marketing films, such as the new Mission Impossible film. I think it's coming out today, literally, or this week here in the UK, which is why a couple of days ago, Netflix acquired the last Mission Impossible film and put it onto Netflix. Why? Because now it suddenly makes sense in their revenue model because people will be watching it. So you got to ask yourself, when should my film be released? If your film is about a certain topic that's currently, the big hype, and everyone is talking about it and it's very topical, but it's a topic that's going to die out in the next 6 months, then by the time that your film comes into market, it will probably be 2 years too late, right? So, there's that to think about. There's, I know an example of a producer called Jeff Deverett who made a film about Olympic gymnasts. Now, he knew that there is only 1 year where people watch films about Olympic gymnasts, and that's the year leading up to the Olympics, right? Outside of that, no one cares. No one is going to watch those films. The film had to be released during that window, otherwise it would fail. So you could ask yourself, is right now the right time to release the film, or whenever it will be ready, will that be the right time? And then finally, you've got to ask yourself, is there a specific enough audience for the film, and can I reach that audience? And that second part is extremely important, because most people go, there's a huge audience for this film. Okay, but can you reach them? And I'll give you an example in a film that I'm currently an executive producer on, which is a documentary feature film about flair bartenders called Shaken and Stirred. Now, what the producers did incredibly well is they knew that they needed to reach people who are very interested in flair bartenders. And they're currently selling the film for $20, which is quite high, but the film is selling because they found an incredible way to reach their audience. So they reached out to a couple thousand flair bartenders around the world, and they gave them affiliate links to sell the film. So now you have flair bartenders who are, doing their thing, getting people in front of them all around the world excited about flair bartenders and flair bartendering. And right after they do, a certain performance and trick and everyone's really excited, they go, by the way, there is the documentary about this. which you can check out over here, and they have the QR code. And that is an incredible way to reach people who are interested in flair bartenders exactly at the right time, exactly when they're super, super pumped to see a film like this, which is in that moment. Because if you reach them 2 weeks later, they probably won't care anymore. So you have to find a way to reach that audience. And this is an example of how they did that. And in addition to that, in terms of filling a gap in the market, it is the only feature film documentary about flair bartendering that currently exists. So if you want to watch a film about that, it has to be that one. So if you're the only one in the market, that really helps as well. So here are just a couple of examples of how you can figure out how to make a marketable film with an audience that you can actually reach, or how filmmakers have done that in the past.
Listen, you touched on some really interesting aspects there. I suppose the aspect of timing, yeah, you're right, that is such another one. Sometimes that can be something that is out of your hands as well. It's difficult to predict certain waves that are going to come and go and trying to ride a certain wave. But the other one, you touched on there was obviously trying to make your film, catering it to a market things. And again, I think that does circle back around again to what we touched on earlier on with indie filmmakers maybe having to, accept certain things depending on what road they want to go down.
When it comes to the business side of the industry, when it comes specifically to marketing, is that most filmmakers are incredibly creative when it comes to making their film. And for some reason, that creativity seems to completely die when it comes to doing the marketing. And it doesn't have to. Marketing doesn't have to be something that's soul-sucking. And with that, I'd like to introduce the concept of inbound marketing versus outbound marketing. If you're currently in a place where you feel like marketing is you promoting, spamming a link in Facebook groups, just messaging people, emailing a bunch of people and saying, please watch my film, that's outbound marketing. That's where you are going out and you are constantly promoting your film. That doesn't tend to be very creative. That tends to be quite repetitive. And that tends to feel a little bit salesy. And if you're feeling like that's putting you off of marketing, then instead try inbound marketing. And inbound marketing is the process of doing something, creating content, or creating some sort of stunt marketing campaign that attracts people's attention to you without you going out and getting it. So a great example of this is social media, right? If you're posting on social media and just talking about your film, there are many filmmakers who have built up their social media presence and, they're not selling anything. They're just talking about their film. People are coming willingly to their platform and listening to them. And because of that, as a byproduct of that, people are watching their films. A great example of this is Jay Horton, right? He, if you guys are interested in self-distribution, definitely check out his YouTube channel. But he does so many videos on self-distribution. And as a byproduct of that, people are interested in watching his films. And I'll finish this off with one story which I really, really love as an example of creating this inbound marketing, which we've spoken a lot about film festivals. And that is the story of the filmmakers who made the film Host. And they had a pretty successful film festival run. They were screened at quite a few different film festivals. And at one of the film festivals, after their screening slot, where a bunch of other films were screened, all the directors were invited to go on stage for a panel discussion. And within that film, there's this storyline where you can create this, where if you create this ring of salt around you, you'll be safe from these demons and so on. And all the directors of the films came up on stage and just sat down on the chair, ready to talk about their films. But the filmmaker and the director behind Host was really, really intelligent in the sense that he came on stage with a big bag of salt and created a ring of salt around him, and he sat down. And for the rest of the film festival, everyone was talking about it. Oh, did you see that guy who made that ring of salt around him? Oh yeah, what was that? It was from that film called Host. Oh, we should check that out. And here I am, 6 years later, talking about this, and I wasn't part of this film in any way. That's inbound marketing. You create something that gets word of mouth marketing going, where people become interested in your film and they start promoting the film for you. So if you've ever been discouraged by marketing, try to change that approach from that spamming and outbound marketing to inbound marketing, which is essentially creating content, which is another form of what you do as a filmmaker, because you'll find that that's way more creative and also, way more productive.
Yeah, I love that story. That kind of reminds me of the Blair Witch Project. Remember the Blair Witch Project from many years ago? A very kind of similar situation happened there, where I might have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure I read this somewhere that and it stuck in my mind, that at one of the festivals that they was at back in the day with the Blair Witch Project, they went around and put missing posters up of the cast, because the cast were unknowns from what I can remember at the time. No one really knew. And wherever they were at these festivals, people thought it was that these people were really missing. And it started to create a bit of, I think there's some people missing. But it was building up this kind of clever marketing ploy, and it stuck in people's minds. And eventually people realized that, no, actually that's for the Blair Witch Project. And it just massively helped. But could you talk a bit more about the actual sort of process regards to how it works with people submitting their short films to Cine Circle and the selection process? And
so we're very, very transparent. Our full terms and conditions and the contract that you would be signing is right there on our website under the short film distribution tab. The process is pretty simple in terms of applying. There's a short form to fill out, some basic information about your film and a link to your film. That film will not be shared with anyone outside of Cine Circle, aside from a couple of filmmakers with who your film will be packaged with. So you can submit your film knowing that you're not committing to anything when you're submitting that film. You will then have a chance to review the other short films that you are packaged with before you have to sign the contract. And again, the contract you can see before you even submit your film. So with that, it's very, very transparent. In terms of how we package films into the anthologies, we're obviously looking at quality, the quality of the story, the quality of the acting, how good that film is, both objectively and subjectively, but also how coherently it will fit in within the theme of certain anthologies. So one of the first ones that we've put together is a horror short film anthology, where we're really exploring the darkest corners of the human psyche. And we're really, we picked some really, really dark horror films where people do some crazy things. And that was the theme. But we're also, we're very much open to all different genres, animations, documentaries, all different, short film genres as well. So we simply pick films that have the right quality, and if we find 5 films that are of the right quality and that have a theme that will make them, turn them into coherent anthology, we will then submit a proposal to all the filmmakers to become part of this journey. For this, particularly for this short film anthology, we prefer the finished films. Ideally also when you're coming to the end of your film festival circuit. So not films where you're going to submit now, but actually we can't do anything with it for the next year because you're going to be submitting it to film festivals.
How important would you say are festival selections and awards with regards to your decision making to the films you take?
We've seen some really, really good films that haven't won any awards because they just haven't really gone down that film festival route. But also some that have won many awards. I don't necessarily think it has a huge impact on our decision. But that said, if I have to pick between 2 films that are of nearly equal quality and one has won a bunch of film festivals and one hasn't, I will pick the film that won film festivals because that will make it easier to market. When I put a film on a platform such as FilmHub, one of the key things that I'm asked for is what festivals did this film win? The FilmHub sales team then use that data to pitch that film to different streaming platforms who will probably not watch the film and pick it based on that data. So it is important in the distribution journey, but it's only important at the stage of the film is of good quality. Because if you have a film that's not of good quality and it won a bunch of really, really small film festivals, then it doesn't really make a difference.
Is there any other kind of misconceptions you can touch on now that you could sort of highlight for filmmakers about distribution early on?
Yeah, I think a huge one in terms of the film festival journey is something that I hear a lot is let's just apply to Sundance, just in case. And the reason people hate it when I say this, and it always makes me sound so negative, but just skip Sundance because you won't get in. And I don't mean that to say because I don't know anything about the quality of your film. All I know is that Sundance gets about 12,000 submissions on Film Freeway every single year for that film festival. And the misconception is that if your film is good, it will get in. Whereas Sundance, from those 12,000 films, how many films are picked for the actual film festival? 0. They don't pick any of the films. It's a charity, right? You are giving them money. You're donating to them for these open submissions. The only films that ever get into Sundance are films that they are already aware of before they submit. They come from their incubators, their film funds, referrals, and so on. So that's a big thing. Just skip Sundance and maybe a couple of the other big film festivals because your chances are very, very close to 0, regardless of how good your film is.
Yeah, and I think indie filmmakers as well should also keep reminding themselves that film festivals are a business. What should filmmakers be thinking of early on with regards to what they need to be getting ready with the other materials around their film?
If you are going to be distributing the film yourself, there are 2 really, really important pieces of material that you will need, which you don't necessarily need for our short film anthology because we create them ourselves. But if you're distributing a feature film or even a short film yourself, there's 2 things that you need, which is a trailer and a poster. Trailers, we sort of all know about. The key thing there is to make sure that it's 90 seconds or less. No one's going to watch a 3 or 4 minute trailer. Like, we've all got these TikTok brains, which is why you see that now these big blockbuster films, when they release a trailer, the first 5 seconds is a mini trailer of the trailer, right? Like, you have all the action sequences, and then it goes to the trailer. And that's because no one can be bothered to even watch more than 5 seconds. So keep the trailer short. But actually something that is the most important, and again, this is slightly controversial, but there is a marketing asset that's more important than the film itself when it comes to the performance of the film, which is the poster. And that's because on nearly every single streaming platform, the only piece of information that you will have about the film when you're making a decision of whether to watch it or not is the poster. Like, if you go on Tubi, you are basing a decision of whether you're going to watch this film based off of the poster. So if a poster is good, people will start watching that film. And even if the film is terrible, it will take them 5 to 10 minutes to figure out, by which time they've been fed 6 different ads and you've already made revenue, right? Not saying that we should be trashing that streaming platform with bad content, but I'm just saying a great poster and a really bad film will make more money than a really good film and a really bad poster, because that poster is what's going to sell your film. So in the same way that you wouldn't become your own director of photography unless you have experience in that area, do not design your own poster unless you are a professional poster designer. Spend a couple $100 on getting a professional poster designer and it will be the best money you've ever spent.
Absolutely. I can definitely agree with that. My film, I was very fortunate enough to have a very talented artist who created my film poster. And that's definitely true. When later on, further down the line, when people started to discover, find and watch my film on various online streaming platforms, sometimes they would reach out to me or I would talk to people afterwards about the film. And one of the big questions I always made a point of asking was, how did you find the film? How did you come across my film? How did you discover it? And the amount of times I had people say to me, I was flicking through whatever it was, Prime Video or one of these other places, and it was the poster that grabbed my attention and pulled me in to want to know more about your film. So 100%, I think what you've just said there is completely true. How much do you look at a film's online presence as a deciding factor prior to you wanting to take it on, with regards to how much effort has gone into them building their online presence on social medias and stuff like that, and whether or not they've got some kind of fan base already pre-existing? Do you take those things into consideration? Because I do definitely think there are a lot of distribution companies who do look at those things as deciding factors. So is that something that you are also taking on as a consideration?
At this stage, me or Cine Circle, particularly for these short film anthologies, we do not take that into consideration. We haven't actually looked at any of the social media platforms. But that said, if we were distributing feature films, 100% we would look at that. When I look at what feature films I could potentially come on board as an exec producer to help them distribute the films, I 100% look at that. And once again, I've spoken to many film festival programmers. They look at it too, even though they're sometimes reluctant to discuss it, but they look at it. Distributors look at it. Currently, just for these short film anthologies, we don't. But if this is a branch of the company that will expand, we will, because that social media presence signifies a couple of different things. First of all, will you be helping to promote this film? And there's this misconception that if you hand your film over to the distributor, that's it, you're done. No, you still have an active part in promoting that film. You always will. No one will be able to market that film better than you as the filmmaker. So this signifies to the distributor, you will be helping to promote the film. And then second of all, it shows that you're able to do that, right? If you have a massive social media following, yeah, you can do that. What I'd recommend is do not create a new Instagram page and a new Facebook page for every single film that you do. Instead, have a social media presence on every single platform for your production company or for yourself as a creator, and continue to build on that with every single film. So every single film, you will get more followers, you will get more likes, you will get more engagement, rather than this kind of 2015 style of marketing where you had a new Facebook page for every single new project that you started, and in the end they all had like 40 followers. So make sure to just have one and just keep building that up over time.
Let's just say that you're talking to some indie filmmakers now who are kind of on the fence of going down this road or going down that road with what to do with their finished short films with distribution. What would be the sort of selling points that you feel that would set you apart and more entice those filmmakers to want to go down the road with Cine Circle?
So when it comes to short film distribution, first and foremost, I think you should explore all different avenues, right? So you should go to, short film sales agents such as What Media. There are short film sales agents. There are short film distributors. Have a look to see whether those could be right for you. That said, what sets us apart is a couple of different things. First of all, we have a completely non-exclusive model, meaning you can be a part of our anthology and you can at the same time release your film wherever you like in other places and sell your film. So there are filmmakers who, for example, have made a short film. They want to start generating some revenue, but at the same time, they just want as many people to see it as possible. They have the film for free on their YouTube channel where people can mass watch it, but they can also earn revenue by becoming part of our anthologies. So the great thing is we are completely non-exclusive and you can get other deals alongside ours. The second is we take a 20% cut of the revenue that's made, which is pretty much the lowest you'll get when it comes to distributors within the film industry. And the rest of the 80% is split evenly amongst the filmmakers. And then the final thing that most filmmakers really like is the fact that you can have a say on the other films that are in the anthology. So you've got certainty that you won't be put with a film that's of lesser quality, of one that you don't like, or one that would make you feel embarrassed to be part of that anthology, because you get the final say on whether you want to be packaged with those films. So those are the three main selling points for what we're doing.
Thank you very much for today. Massively appreciate it. And big well done to everything you've done with Cine Circle and where you've managed to take it so far with everything with regards to that and the team you have working there. I've seen it firsthand, just how impressive that whole thing is with what you do and what you offer. Again, also with what you're doing with the distribution side of things and helping filmmakers with that is super impressive, and well done with that. And I wish you all the best success with it. And I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic avenue for filmmakers to be able to turn to. And I'm going to be super curious to see how that goes on. And hopefully, further down the line, we can do this again and catch up again and sort of, by then we'll have some sort of success stories with what you've been doing and whatnot. Yeah. So, but yeah, listen, thanks again for today, and big well done with everything that you've been doing on both those fronts.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on. Yeah, it's good speaking to you.
Great.
Yeah.